All of physical reality is composed of energy. And energy is just waves and excitations of some other medium. Waves of energy are like waves in the ocean. They appear out of the ocean, they rise and fall, and eventually they dissipate back into the ocean. They're impermanent. Everything we think of as physical is actually just waves and patterns of excitations of energy. Thinking that physical things are permanent things is like thinking a wave is permanent. If you think physical things can tell you the full story about our reality, it's the same as thinking that taking pictures of the waves on the surface of the ocean tells you everything about the ocean. Sure, it tells you certain things about the surface behavior that's true for certain periods, but it doesn't tell you much about the vast depths of the ocean. If you cling to these surface level ideas, you'll never understand the truth about nature. Someone asked me recently about karma and reincarnation. And I think this metaphor about the ocean could be helpful to understanding both of these ideas. If your mind is attached to your body and your sense of self, then you become attached to the karma of your body. If you're attached to your karma, it's like being attached to the waves on the surface of the ocean. When you're stuck on the surface of the ocean, you're constantly being pushed around by the different waves and excitations of the water. The surface energy is constantly pushing and pulling you. Clinging to the idea of physical reality is like clinging to the waves on the surface of the ocean that are constantly changing. If you're holding on to a wave, what are you actually holding on to? Our mind can hold everything in the universe and everything in nature. However, the mind can't really hold anything physical because everything physical is just waves and excitations of energy. The true nature of our mind is also not physical. It's empty. However, it's not empty like physical space. This room is an empty physical space. But if you had enough things to put in it, eventually you could fill it. Your mind is different because no matter how many things you put in your mind, it's still empty and it can never be filled. It's fundamentally not physical, so no matter what you put into your mind, it never changes. It never changes its volume, it never changes its mass. It's always empty. The contents of your mind can change, but the mind itself never changes. It's always empty. The emptiness of your mind is like a vacuum that creates the potential for all of the forces in our universe. This vacuum of potential energy is the creative energy that pulls all things into existence. This pull is what creates the waves and excitations of energy that become the things that we perceive as reality. The waves and excitations of energy are the same forms of energy that make up your body and hold it together. However, this is still just a surface level understanding, because we all understand that below the surface of every living being, there's a mind. But as your body grows and moves around, it begins to create its own energy and momentum. This is what creates your karma. This is what we call karma. Everything physical, including your body, is really just a pattern of energy that we perceive in our mind. Try to imagine that everything we perceive as physical is a pattern of swirling energy, like a whirlpool in the ocean. As your mind begins to recognize patterns in these swirls of energy, it begins to differentiate between these things as separate entities. In order to gain an understanding of its universe, the mind creates mental constructs to differentiate between these patterns. It then creates conceptual boundaries and a mental framework of associations to categorize these different swirls of energy. As the mind develops this type of conceptual thinking, it begins to identify parts of itself within these swirls of energy. If the mind becomes too attached to identifying with these parts of itself, it develops the delusion that these swirls of energy that form the parts of itself are the entirety of itself. As self-aware humans, we create labels for all of these things we associate with ourselves. We use words to label our world, our body, and the parts of our body. In English, we made the word head to describe this part of our body. And we made the word hand to describe this part of our body. In truth, there's no separation. It's all our body. We just separate the different parts with these mental constructs. We also created the mental framework of association to say that our head and hand are part of our body. Most of the time, we feel like our mind is in our head because we're focused on perceiving things through our eyes, our ears, our smell, and our taste. But if you pinch your finger, it feels like your mind is in your hand. You can also stare into the night sky, gazing at the stars, and feel like your mind is traveling across the universe. In truth, the mind is in all of these places, not just in certain parts. Perhaps we should also consider that the entire universe is part of our celestial body as well. All of our confusion arises from the perceptions of our body. All of these patterns and bodies of swirling energy in the universe are what grab your attention and consume your mind and keep it attached to the things that we perceive on the surface. The energy pattern that makes your body is what you perceive as the origin of your perceptions. So it becomes what you identify as yourself. In truth, your perceptions require energy going both ways. All energy requires both a source and a destination to be perceived. Your body is essentially like a whirlpool of energy that's constantly sucking in energy, and it's simultaneously sending out ripples of energy away from it into the universe. The swirling energy of your body creates what we perceive to be your life. When we're alive, we perceive the energy of the universe through our bodies. All of our senses are receptors of energy. When we're alive, we perceive life to be a cycle, a complete circle. It starts with birth and it ends with death. But that's only basically a two-dimensional surface view of a deeper, multi-dimensional reality. I frequently ask people this koan: where do you come from before you were born? And where do you go after you die? Most people don't have an answer, but most of them don't think that they magically appear and disappear. Their intuition tells them they came from somewhere, and that after they die, they'll go somewhere. Most religions have some sort of version of this story as well. Science has its own version of this story too. Things in nature do not just magically appear and disappear. The law of conservation of energy in physics tells us that energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only change forms. Theoretically, this law applies to everything in nature. And you can also see this principle at work in our lives. During our lives, we create all types of energy and momentum with our bodies that affects our environment. Sometimes you can even see evidence of how the energy of someone's life creates momentum that lasts for a long time after the person's gone. I could name a handful of books that created momentum for decades or even centuries after the author passed away. The ideas carried the energy of the person, and they lived on in their own form. In truth, when we die, only our body is gone. But the energy that we create during our lives just changes form and continues. This is exactly what the law of conservation of energy tells us happens. After we die, the energy and momentum that we create within our whirlpools of our life is still there, even though we can no longer perceive it or measure it in a tangible way. The energy just transforms and continues on. Eventually, this energy takes on a form that we as humans can perceive again, as a life form. We typically refer to this transformation of energy as birth, although many cultures around the world, including Buddhism, call this reincarnation, because it's just a transfer of that same life energy. If you view these events as a process that happens on the surface level, you can see a series of cause and effects that lead to the creation of a body. But we still have no account for where the mind or consciousness comes from during that process. This is because we only have a superficial view and a surface level understanding of how things work. To understand the truth of how things work, you have to be able to see below the surface. In order to get a different perspective, you have to learn to release yourself from the energy of the waves that keep your mind stuck on the surface. You have to allow your mind to sink into the depths below so that it can understand what is beneath the waves. So how can you do this? If you think of every being as a whirlpool in the ocean, what's at the center of this whirlpool? Every whirlpool spirals down to a point at its center, which leads into the depths of the water. Every being has that same point at the center of their being. To understand where that point is, you have to remain completely focused and centered on that point until you completely understand it, 100%. In Zen, we call that point the mind. The mind is the center of our being. In Zen, we constantly challenge ourselves to answer this koan. What is the mind? That question is the seed at the center of our being, and we focus the light of our mind on that seed until we can see it blossom. The key is to learn how to focus your mind and be completely centered in every moment until it becomes effortless. This is the meaning of Zen or dhyana. When you allow your mind to flow to its center, it goes below the surface, below the waves and whirlpools. When you're completely centered in a state of dhyana, you get a different perspective and recognize that all of these waves and whirlpools are merely different formations and mental constructs of the same mind. It's one thing to intellectually understand or believe what I'm telling you, but that's not really the point of Zen. Whatever you think about what I'm saying is not actually important at all. You have to prove or disprove everything you believe until you know for sure, 100%. The point of Zen is for you to prove this for yourself. This means you have to experience it for yourself. And the only way to experience this is to be completely focused and centered in every moment. The way you do this is by learning and understanding how to focus your mind in every moment. When I teach Zen, I try to make people aware that there are a number of ways to learn how to focus your mind. I showed you a sitting meditation technique at the beginning of this class, and you can use that to focus your mind. Another important aspect of Zen is learning to keep your mind completely focused no matter what you're doing, without letting your mind wander off into different thoughts. This means treating everything you do as a mantra. You can do this by completely staying focused on everything that you're doing. That might sound easy, but it's not actually always easy to do. There are always thoughts that can distract you and pull your attention away from the present moment. You can learn to get better at focusing on the present moment by practicing moving meditation. I find that for most people, it's helpful to practice moving meditation with an activity that you enjoy. It could be an art form like drawing, writing, or making music. It could also be a form of physical exercise like yoga, riding a bike, weightlifting, or even going for a walk. For me, I learned how to do this through practicing martial arts. It's even more helpful if the activity you're doing demands your attention. But it really doesn't matter what the activity is, as long as you can stay focused. When you can effortlessly sustain a flow state where your actions flow through you without thinking, that's dhyana. That's Zen. For most people, focusing their mind takes practice. To get better at this, I'd recommend setting a small part of your day aside and practicing sitting and moving meditation, even if it's just for 5 minutes for each day. The consistent practice every day is it's the most important part of getting better. If you practice every day, your body will become very familiar with what you're doing, and eventually it will stop resisting your mind. Then your mind can release itself from the grips of energy that are always pulling it back to the surface. You can always expand your practice, but always try to do at least some minimum amount of practice every day. Consistency is the key. If you keep practicing like this, you can reach an effortless state of flow in everything you do, whether it's eating, doing the dishes, cleaning your room, or the work you do at your job. If you keep going and keep your focus centered in every moment like this, you can directly experience the mind at the center of your being. It lies just below the surface of everything we perceive. When you experience this, you can completely 100% understand the mind. This is what we call getting enlightenment. When you experience the depth of the mind, you'll realize that everything physical, including you and I, are just like whirlpools and waves in the same ocean of the mind. I hope you all can experience this for yourself, and I wish you good luck and good fortune on your journeys.